The moment Emma Rodriguez looked me dead in the eyes and said those words, I felt something inside me shatter completely. We were standing in the Grind Caf, that trendy little coffee shop 3 blocks from our office, where the entire Innovate Labs crew would hang out after work. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The place was buzzing with the usual Portland evening crowd. Indie music playing softly in the background, the smell of freshly roasted beans filling the air. Emma had just finished laughing at something Tyler Brooks whispered in her ear, and when I finally worked up the courage to approach her after 2 years of silent admiration, she delivered the most devastating rejection I'd ever experienced. "Marcus, you're sweet, really you are," she said, tucking a strand of her dark hair behind her ear. "But let's be honest here. You're just not the kind of guy who could ever be worthy of real love. I mean, look at yourself. You spend your days coding in a corner, you barely speak up in meetings, and you think bringing me coffee every morning is somehow romantic. That's not love, Marcus. That's just sad." The words hit me like a physical blow. Around us, conversations continued as if nothing had happened, but I felt like the entire world had just witnessed my complete humiliation. Tyler, our senior project manager, who seemed to effortlessly command respect from everyone in the company, placed a protective hand on Emma's shoulder and gave me this look of pity mixed with amusement. He was everything I wasn't: confident, charismatic, the type of guy who could walk into any room and immediately become the center of attention. "Hey man, no hard feelings, right?" Tyler said with that perfect smile of his. "Emma's just being honest. Sometimes the truth hurts, but it's better than living in Fantasyland." I had been working at Innovate Labs for almost 3 years, starting as a junior developer fresh out of college. The company developed mobile applications for small businesses. And while the work wasn't exactly revolutionary, it paid well, and the atmosphere was generally relaxed. That's where I first met Emma, who joined the marketing team about 2 years ago. From the moment she walked into that first company meeting, wearing a bright yellow dress that seemed to light up the entire conference room, I was completely captivated. Emma had this energy about her that was absolutely magnetic. She could pitch ideas with such passion that even the most skeptical clients would find themselves nodding along. She remembered everyone's birthdays, organized team happy hours, and had this way of making even the most mundane work projects feel exciting. I found myself looking forward to Monday mornings just because I'd get to see her again. For months, I convinced myself that my feelings were just a harmless workplace crush. But as time went on, I realized I was falling deeper and deeper for her. I started bringing her coffee every morning, always remembering exactly how she liked it: medium roast with oat milk and just a touch of vanilla syrup. I'd volunteer for any project that meant working with the marketing team. During company meetings, I'd find myself studying the way she took notes, how she'd bite her lower lip when she was concentrating, the way her eyes would light up when she had a breakthrough idea. The problem was, I could never seem to work up the courage to actually talk to her about anything beyond work. Every conversation we had felt stilted and awkward on my end. While Emma was naturally outgoing and could strike up a conversation with anyone, I had always been more comfortable behind a computer screen than in social situations. My sister Nina constantly told me I was overthinking everything, that I should just ask Emma out for coffee and see what happened. My best friend Jake, who worked as a graphic designer at a different company, kept insisting that Emma was giving me signals, and I was just too dense to pick up on them. "Dude, she literally saves you a seat at every company lunch," Jake would say during our weekly gaming sessions. "Last week, when you were sick, she asked me how you were doing 3 different times. That's not normal coworker behavior." But every time I thought about making a move, I'd see Emma laughing with Tyler or watching how effortlessly he commanded attention during presentations, and I'd lose my nerve completely. Tyler had joined Innovate Labs about 6 months after Emma, coming in as a senior project manager with impressive credentials from a major tech company in Seattle. He was the kind of guy who seemed to excel at everything without even trying. He could code when needed, had a natural talent for client relations, and somehow always knew exactly what to say in any situation. The worst part was that Tyler seemed genuinely nice. He'd include me in conversations, ask for my input on technical decisions, and never made me feel stupid for asking questions. If anything, He went out of his way to be encouraging and supportive. When I'd stumble over my words during team meetings, Tyler would jump in and help clarify my points in a way that made me sound more competent than I felt. It was impossible to dislike him, which somehow made everything worse. Over the past few months, I'd noticed Tyler and Emma spending more and more time together. They'd disappear for long lunch meetings that seemed to involve more laughter than actual work discussion. Emma would light up whenever Tyler walked into a room in a way that made my heart sink. During our company's quarterly reviews, Tyler had specifically requested to work more closely with the marketing team, which meant he and Emma were now collaborating on almost every major project. Still, I held on to hope. Maybe it was just professional friendship. Maybe Emma was single and just hadn't met the right person yet. Maybe if I could just find the right moment, the right words, could show her that there was more to me than the quiet guy in the corner, who fixed code bugs and rarely spoke up during brainstorming sessions. That hope had been building for weeks, ever since Emma had started what seemed like more personal conversations with me. She'd ask about my weekend plans, compliment the new shirt I'd bought, even suggest that we should hang out outside of work sometime. Last Friday, when the whole team was discussing weekend plans, Emma had specifically mentioned that she'd be at the Grind Cafe on Tuesday evening if anyone wanted to join her for coffee and catch up. I spent the entire weekend rehearsing what I'd say. I practiced in front of my bathroom mirror, ran through different scenarios with Nina, even wrote down key points on my phone in case I got nervous and forgot everything. By Tuesday evening, I was convinced this was my moment. Emma had practically invited me to meet her at the cafe. This was finally my chance to tell her how I felt and see if maybe, just maybe, she might feel something for me too. Arrived at the Grind, I found Emma already there with Tyler, sitting in one of those cozy corner booths, their heads bent close together over what looked like marketing materials spread across the table. They seemed so comfortable together, so natural, that for a moment I almost turned around and left. But then Emma spotted me and waved me over with a genuine smile. "Marcus, perfect timing. Tyler and I were just going over the client presentation for tomorrow, but we're basically done. Come sit with us." For about 20 minutes, everything seemed normal. We talked about work, laughed about some of the ridiculous client requests we'd been getting lately, and I started to relax. Emma seemed happy to see me, asking about the new mobile framework I'd been learning, and even suggesting that maybe I could present it to the team next week. Tyler was his usual supportive self, encouraging Emma's idea and adding that he thought I had valuable insights that the team could benefit from. But then Tyler excused himself to take a phone call, and suddenly I was alone with Emma for the first time in months outside of work. The conversation felt different, more intimate somehow. Emma moved to Tyler's side of the booth, sitting closer to me than we'd ever sat before. She asked about my family, my hobbies, whether I was seeing anyone. When I told her I wasn't dating anyone, she got this thoughtful look on her face. "You know, Marcus, you're really sweet," she said, and my heart started racing. "You deserve someone who appreciates how thoughtful you are." That's when I decided to take the leap. My hands were shaking slightly as I looked into her brown eyes and told her how I'd been feeling. I explained that I'd had feelings for her for a long time, that I thought we could be good together, that I'd love to take her out to dinner sometime and see where things could go between us. I tried to keep my voice steady, to sound confident like Tyler always did, but I could hear the nervousness creeping in as I spoke. Emma's expression changed immediately. The warmth in her eyes was replaced by something that looked almost like shock, then pity. She glanced toward the door where Tyler had gone to take his call, then back at me with a look I'd never seen from her before. That's when she delivered those crushing words about my worthiness of love, words that would replay in my mind for weeks to come. And as Tyler returned from his phone call to witness the aftermath of my humiliation, I realized that my quiet, comfortable life at Innovate Labs was about to become very complicated indeed. The days following my humiliation at the Grind felt like living in an alternate reality where everyone had collectively decided I was the villain in a story I didn't understand. Word of what happened spread through Innovate Labs faster than I thought possible, but the version people heard was apparently very different from what actually occurred. According to the office gossip mill, I had cornered Emma at the cafe, made her extremely uncomfortable with inappropriate advances. The story painted me as some kind of creepy stalker who had been obsessing over her for months, bringing her coffee every day as part of some manipulative scheme to wear down her defenses. People whispered that Tyler had to step in to protect Emma from my unwanted attention, and that Emma was now afraid to be alone with me. I first realized how bad things had gotten when I walked into the break room Thursday morning, and the conversation immediately stopped. Lisa Park from HR was there with 2 other marketing team members, and they all looked at me like I'd just walked in covered in blood. Lisa cleared her throat awkwardly and mumbled something about needing to get back to work. And within seconds, the room was empty except for me and the humming of the refrigerator. The isolation was systematic and thorough. During team meetings, people would avoid making eye contact with me. When I tried to contribute ideas, there would be these uncomfortable silences followed by someone changing the subject. My usual lunch group suddenly had scheduling conflicts every day. Even Jake, who didn't work at our company, but had always. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Been my closest friend, started acting weird when I told him what happened. Look, Marcus, I wasn't there, so I don't know exactly what went down, Jake said when we met for our usual Thursday evening gaming session. But maybe you came on too strong, you know. Emma's out of your league, man. It's time to be realistic about these things. The comment stung because it echoed Emma's words about worthiness. Jake had been the one encouraging me to ask her out for months, and now suddenly, he was treating me like I'd done something wrong by following his advice. When I tried to explain exactly what had happened, how gentle and respectful I'd been, Jake just shrugged and said sometimes women felt pressured even when guys thought they were being nice. Work became a nightmare. Tyler, who had always been supportive and encouraging, maintained his friendly demeanor, but something fundamental had shifted. He'd still include me in conversations and ask for my input, but there was this underlying current of condescension that hadn't been there before. He'd explain things to me that I already knew, double-check my work more carefully, and sometimes rephrase my contributions in meetings as if he was translating for people who couldn't understand my technical language. Marcus had an interesting thought about the database optimization, Tyler would say, after I'd just finished explaining my idea in detail. What he's suggesting is that we restructure the queries to reduce load time. Then he'd proceed to re-explain my own concept back to me while the rest of the team nodded along as if Tyler had come up with the solution himself. The worst part was how Emma started treating me. She wasn't cruel or dramatic about it, which almost would have been easier to handle. Instead, she became coldly professional, speaking to me only when absolutely necessary for work purposes. She'd send emails instead of walking over to my desk for quick questions. During meetings, she'd address the entire room rather than make direct eye contact with me, even when responding to something I'd said. But it was the little things that really drove home how completely my social standing had changed. Emma stopped saying good morning when she arrived at the office. She'd take different routes through the office to avoid passing my desk. When I held the elevator for her one morning, she thanked me with the same tone she'd use for a stranger, then spent the entire ride staring at her phone in obvious discomfort. My sister Nina was one of the few people who didn't immediately assume I'd done something wrong, but even she seemed to think I was overreacting to the situation. When I called her that weekend, frustrated and confused about how quickly everything had fallen apart, she listened patiently, but her advice felt tone-deaf. "Maybe this is actually a good thing," Nina said, and I could hear her typing in the background, probably working on one of her computer science assignments. "You've been obsessing over this girl for 2 years? Maybe getting rejected will help you move on and find someone who actually appreciates you." "It's not about the rejection," I tried to explain. "It's about how she rejected me, how everyone is acting like I did something terrible when all I did was tell her how I felt. Look, Marcus, I love you, but sometimes guys don't realize how their behavior comes across to women. Maybe you were more intense than you thought. Maybe she felt like you put her in an uncomfortable position." Even my own sister was questioning my version of events. It felt like everyone had collectively decided that Tyler's presence at the cafe somehow made him a more reliable witness to what had happened. Even though he'd been outside taking a phone call during the actual conversation, the professional, Consequences became clear the following week when our team assignments were restructured. I found myself moved off the major client projects I've been working on for months and assigned to maintenance tasks and bug fixes. When I asked Tyler about it during our weekly one-on-one meeting, he explained it with that same patronizing concern that had become his default tone with me. "I think it's probably best if you focus on some of the back-end work for a while," Tyler said, leaning back in his chair with his hands clasped behind his head. "You seem a little distracted lately, and these smaller projects might be a better fit while you get your head back in the game." "I'm not distracted," I protested. "My work quality hasn't changed at all. I've been meeting all my deadlines, and my code reviews have been positive. It's not about technical competence, Marcus. It's about team dynamics. Some people are feeling a little uncomfortable with the current situation. As a leader, I need to prioritize the overall well-being of the group." The implication was clear. I was being demoted because Emma had complained about me. Tyler was protecting her from having to work closely with someone who made her uncomfortable. I wanted to argue, to demand specifics about these supposed complaints, but I could see there was no point. Tyler had made his decision, and questioning it would only make me look more unreasonable. My parents made everything worse when I tried to talk to them about what was happening. During our regular Sunday phone call, my mom listened to my complaints with increasingly obvious impatience before finally cutting me off mid-sentence. "Marcus, honey, you're 25 years old. Maybe it's time to stop blaming other people. When things don't go your way," her voice had that disappointed tone that always made me feel like a child being scolded. "This girl told you she wasn't interested. Instead of accepting that gracefully, you're creating drama at work and making everyone uncomfortable." "I'm not creating drama," I said, but even as the words came out, I could hear how defensive I sounded. I told her how I felt. She said, "No, and that should have been the end of it. I don't understand why everyone is treating me like I did something wrong, because maybe you did do something wrong," my dad chimed in from the background. "You don't mess around with workplace. Relationships, son, that's career 101. You should apologize to this girl and focus on doing your job better." The conversation ended with them suggesting I talk to a therapist about my inability to handle rejection appropriately, promising to send me some articles about professional workplace behavior. I hung up, feeling more isolated than ever, wondering if maybe everyone else was right, and I was completely delusional about what had actually happened at the cafe. The isolation reached its peak during our monthly company happy hour at a trendy bar downtown. These events had always been my favorite part of working at Innovate Labs, a chance to relax with colleagues, play pool, and feel like part of a real team. But this time, it felt like being a ghost haunting a party where everyone could see me, but nobody wanted to acknowledge my presence. I stood near the bar, nursing a beer while conversations flowed around me, without including me. Emma was holding court at a high-top table surrounded by most of the marketing team and several developers, telling some animated story that had everyone laughing. Tyler stood beside her with his hand resting casually on the back of her chair, looking like the perfect supportive colleague. When I tried to join a conversation between two other developers about a new framework we'd been considering for upcoming projects, they both found excuses to leave within minutes. When I approached the group playing pool, they somehow forgot to invite me into the next round. Even the bartender seemed to take longer to acknowledge me when I tried to order another drink. The final humiliation came when Emma herself approached me near the end of the evening. I was sitting alone at the bar, watching everyone else laugh and socialize, when she materialized beside me with what looked like genuine concern on her face. "Marcus, can we talk for a minute?" she asked, glancing around to make sure people weren't obviously listening. Feel terrible about how awkward things have been at work. For a moment, hope flared in my chest. Maybe she wanted to clear the air, to acknowledge that the office gossip had gotten out of hand, to find a way for us to work together professionally, even if romance was off the table. "I've been thinking about what happened at the cafe," Emma continued, her voice soft and sincere. "And I realize I could have handled it better. I didn't mean to be so harsh." "It's okay," I said quickly, grateful that she was finally willing to have an honest conversation. "I know I put you in an awkward position. I just want things to go back to normal at work." Emma nodded, looking relieved. "I'm glad you understand. The thing is, Tyler has been so supportive through all of this, helping me figure out how to handle the situation professionally. He's been such a good friend. She glanced toward where Tyler was chatting with some clients, her expression softening in a way that made my stomach clench. I just wanted you to know that I don't want there to be any hard feelings between us. There aren't, I lied, because what else could I say? Good. Because Tyler thinks it might be good for everyone if we just keep things strictly professional from now on. No more coffee deliveries, no more personal conversations, just work stuff. He thinks that might help everyone feel more comfortable. The way she said Tyler's name, with such obvious respect and affection, made it clear that whatever advice he'd given her was being presented as wisdom from someone she deeply trusted. I was being managed, handled like a problem that needed a careful solution, and Emma was delivering Tyler's verdict with genuine belief that this was the kindest way to handle an unfortunate situation. I agreed to everything she suggested because I couldn't think of any alternative that wouldn't make me look even more unreasonable. I told her I understood that I appreciated her talking to me directly, that I just wanted everyone to be comfortable. At work, I played the part of the gracious loser accepting his fate, even as something inside me was screaming that none of this was fair or made any sense. Walking home that night through the quiet Portland streets, I felt more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. Everyone I trusted had either abandoned me or decided I was the problem, in a situation I still didn't fully understand. The future stretched ahead of me looking like endless days of professional isolation, careful avoidance, and the constant feeling that I was one small mistake away from losing my job entirely. I had no idea that the worst was yet to come, or that the person I'd trusted most to help navigate this situation had been orchestrating my destruction from the very beginning. The breaking point came 3 weeks later, during what should have been a routine system backup. I was working late on a Friday evening, trying to catch up on the mountain of maintenance tasks Tyler had assigned me, when I accidentally accessed the wrong server directory. Instead of finding the database files I needed, I stumbled across Tyler's personal folder that somehow hadn't been properly secured from the shared network drive. What I found inside made my blood run cold. There were screenshots of Emma's social media posts going back months. Some from before Tyler had even started working at Innovate Labs, photos of her at restaurants, coffee shops, even outside her apartment building that looked like they'd been taken from across the street with a telephoto lens. But it was the text file labeled Emma_schedule_notes that made me realize I wasn't dealing with a normal workplace rivalry. The document was meticulous in its detail. Tyler had been tracking Emma's daily routines, noting what time she arrived at work, when she took lunch breaks, which route she walked to the parking garage. He'd recorded her favorite coffee order, the names of her friends, even details about her family members that I'd never heard her mention at work. There were observations about her mood on different days, theories about what kind of compliments made her smile, disturbing notes about how to gradually isolate her from other male colleagues. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through entries that dated back almost to Tyler's first day at the company. He'd been planning this systematic campaign to win Emma's affection while eliminating any potential competition. There were detailed profiles of every male employee who'd shown interest in Emma, complete with strategies for undermining their confidence and social standing. My own name appeared frequently, with notes about my pathetic devotion and how easy it would be to manipulate the situation to make me look like a creep. One entry from 2 months ago made my stomach turn. E seems to enjoy Eam's attention, but doesn't take him seriously romantically. Perfect opportunity to let him make a fool of himself publicly, then position myself as the protective colleague who helped her handle an uncomfortable situation. Need to encourage Em to be more direct with his feelings than be nearby to witness the inevitable disaster. Everything clicked into place with sickening clarity. Tyler had been the one suggesting I was too passive, too afraid to take risks with Emma. He'd made subtle comments about how women liked confidence, how I should stop overthinking and just tell Emma how I felt. He'd even suggested that evening at the grind would be perfect timing, mentioning that Emma seemed more open to personal conversations lately and that the relaxed atmosphere might work in my favor. I'd thought Tyler was being supportive, helping me work up the courage to finally make a move. Instead, he'd been setting me up for the most humiliating failure possible. positioning himself to swoop in as Emma's protector and confidant. The phone call that had taken him away from our table hadn't been coincidental. There was a note in his file about calling his own. Got ver number from a burner phone to create the perfect opportunity for me to confess my feelings without witnesses. To the actual conversation. Even worse were the notes about Emma's reaction that night. According to Tyler's observations, Emma had seemed genuinely surprised and uncomfortable with my confession, but not particularly cruel or dismissive. Her harsh words about my worthiness had apparently come after Tyler returned from his fake phone call and whispered something in her ear about how I'd been bothering her for months, and this was a pattern of inappropriate workplace behavior. The manipulation went deeper than I'd imagined. Tyler had been feeding Emma carefully crafted stories about my behavior, describing my daily coffee deliveries as obsessive and my attempts at friendly conversation as boundary pushing. He'd convinced her that my polite questions about her weekend plans were actually attempts to gather personal information for stalking purposes. Every kind gesture I'd made over the past 2 years had been reframed through Tyler's lens as evidence of unhealthy fixation. But the most damning evidence was in a folder labeled Phase 2 Implementation. Tyler's plan didn't end with destroying my reputation and eliminating me as romantic competition. He intended to gradually isolate Emma from all her male colleagues, friends, and even family members who might interfere with his ultimate goal of complete psychological control. There were detailed strategies for making Emma dependent on his emotional support. Plans to sabotage her other friendships by spreading carefully crafted rumors, don'ts about identifying her insecurities, so he could position himself as the only person who truly understood and accepted her. The final document in the folder was titled Long-Term Relationship Goals and contained detailed fantasies about their future together that read like the manifesto of someone completely detached from reality. Imagined conversations with their future children, and even selected a house he wanted to buy for them in the suburbs. None of this involved Emma's actual consent or desires. It was all Tyler's elaborate delusion about a relationship that existed only in his mind. I sat in the empty office staring at the screen until my eyes burned, trying to process the magnitude of what I'd discovered. This wasn't just about workplace drama or romantic competition. Tyler was genuinely dangerous, a predator who'd spent months studying Emma like a hunter tracking prey. Every interaction I'd witnessed between them took on a sinister new meaning. When I realized Emma had no idea she was being systematically manipulated by someone who viewed her as an object to be acquired rather than a person to be loved. My first instinct was to screenshot everything and send it directly to Emma, but something held me back. Who would believe me? I was already seen as the bitter, rejected guy who couldn't handle being turned down. If I came forward with accusations about Tyler's secret obsession, it would look like a desperate attempt to get revenge on the man who'd stolen the woman I wanted. Tyler had been so careful to establish himself as the reasonable, protective colleague, while painting me as unstable and inappropriate. Any evidence I presented would be dismissed as fabricated jealousy. Instead, I started documenting everything, methodically. I used my phone to photograph the most damning files, being careful not to leave any trace of my access in the system logs. I made note of inconsistencies in Tyler's behavior that I'd previously dismissed as personality quirks. The way he always seemed to know exactly where Emma was in the office, how he'd show up wherever she was having lunch, his uncanny ability to anticipate her needs and preferences. Over the next few days, I began paying closer attention to Tyler and Emma's interactions with my new understanding of what was really happening. The dynamic I'd interpreted as natural chemistry was actually Tyler's calculated manipulation in action. He'd compliment Emma in ways that subtly undermined her confidence, making her feel special while suggesting she needed his guidance. He'd offer solutions to problems at work that he'd actually created himself, positioning himself as her rescuer and protector. Emma, meanwhile, seemed genuinely grateful for Tyler's attention and support, completely unaware that her growing dependence on his validation was the result of careful psychological conditioning. She'd started dressing differently, choosing outfits that aligned with preferences Tyler had expressed in casual conversation. She'd adopted some of his opinions about movies and restaurants, apparently not noticing how her own tastes were gradually shifting to match his. The most chilling realization was how effectively Tyler had isolated Emma from potential allies. Lisa Park from HR, who used to have regular lunch meetings with Emma, had gradually been excluded from their circle. A series of misunderstandings that I now recognized as Tyler's manipulation. Emma's work friendships with male colleagues had deteriorated due to Tyler's subtle suggestions about inappropriate behavior and unprofessional boundaries. Even Emma's relationship with her roommate had become strained after Tyler convinced her that the woman was jealous of her success and trying to undermine her confidence. I started keeping a detailed journal of Tyler's behavior, noting patterns that might help build a case against him. He had a habit of staying late at the office on days when Emma worked late, always finding excuses to check on her and offer to walk her to her car. He'd volunteer for any business trips or client meetings that Emma was assigned to, ensuring they spent as much time together as possible. Most disturbing of all, he'd started making subtle suggestions about Emma's safety, pointing out potential threats and dangers that required his protection. The opportunity I'd been waiting for came during our company's annual retreat at a mountain lodge outside Portland. The entire team would be spending 3 days together in a remote location, participating in team-building exercises and strategic planning sessions. Tyler had been particularly excited about the retreat, mentioning multiple times how nice it would be to get away from the distractions of the city and focus on strengthening workplace relationships. I realized this was likely when Tyler planned to escalate his campaign, taking advantage of the isolated location and relaxed atmosphere to deepen his psychological hold over Emma. But it was also my best chance to gather more evidence, potentially find a way to expose him without seeming like a vindictive ex-admirer seeking revenge. I spent the week before the retreat preparing carefully. I researched Tyler's background more thoroughly, discovering that he'd left his previous job in Seattle under mysterious circumstances that the company refused to discuss. 2 former colleagues through LinkedIn, pretending to be conducting professional references, uncovered a pattern of inappropriate behavior toward female coworkers that had been quietly managed rather than formally addressed. Most importantly, I figured out how to access Tyler's personal devices. During a team lunch, I'd noticed him using the same password for his laptop that he'd mentioned using for his gym membership during casual conversation. It was a small detail, but it gave me the opening I needed to gather the kind of irrefutable evidence that even Tyler's careful reputation management couldn't explain away. The mountain lodge where our retreat was held was perfect for Tyler's plans, isolated enough that any incidents could be explained away as misunderstandings, with plenty of opportunities for private conversations and romantic moments under the stars. But it was also perfect for my plans, away from the familiar environment of the office. Tyler might let his guard down enough for me to catch him in behavior that would expose his true nature. I spent the first day of the retreat observing, carefully noting how Tyler maneuvered to ensure he and Emma were paired together for every team-building exercise. He'd volunteered to help her with her luggage, insisted on carrying her hiking backpack during our afternoon nature walk, and somehow managed to secure the cabin room directly next to hers. Every gesture appeared thoughtful and gentlemanly, too. Outside observers, but I could see the calculated precision behind each move. That evening, as everyone gathered around the campfire for the traditional retreat storytelling session, I noticed Tyler discreetly photographing Emma without her knowledge. The pictures weren't obviously inappropriate, just candid shots of her laughing at jokes or gazing thoughtfully into the fire, but combined with everything else I'd discovered, they felt like evidence of his obsessive documentation of her. Every moment. The breakthrough came on the second night when Tyler made his first major mistake. Confident that he was surrounded by colleagues who viewed him as trustworthy and me as unreliable, he finally let his mask slip just enough for me to capture proof of what he'd been hiding all along. Tyler's mistake happened around midnight on the second night of the retreat. Most of the team had gone to bed after a long evening of strategic planning sessions and too much wine around the campfire. I was in my cabin pretending to sleep when I heard footsteps on the gravel path outside. Through my window, I watched Tyler creeping toward Emma's cabin with something in his hand that looked like a small device. I grabbed my phone and followed him at a distance, staying in the shadows of the pine trees that surrounded the lodge. Tyler approached Emma's window and carefully attached what I could now see was a small wireless camera to the exterior frame, angling it to capture the interior of her room. The device was tiny and black, nearly invisible against the dark window frame. But from my position, I could see the small red LED that indicated it was recording. My hands were steady as I recorded Tyler installing the camera, making sure to capture his face clearly in the moonlight. This was the evidence I'd been waiting for, behavior so obviously criminal that even Tyler's carefully cultivated reputation couldn't explain it away. But instead of confronting him immediately, I decided to wait and see what else he might reveal when he thought he was completely unobserved. Tyler spent nearly 20 minutes adjusting the camera's position, occasionally checking something on his phone that I assumed was the live feed. He seemed completely absorbed in his work, muttering to himself in a way that suggested this wasn't his first time engaging in this kind of surveillance. When he was finally satisfied with the setup, he pulled out a small notebook and made some notes, then took several photos of the window from different angles. After Tyler returned to his cabin, I waited another hour before carefully removing the camera. The device was more sophisticated than I'd expected, with wireless transmission capabilities and what looked like several hours of battery life. This wasn't something Tyler had improvised for the retreat. It was professional-grade surveillance equipment that he'd planned to use well in advance. I spent the rest of the night copying the contents of Tyler's phone, taking advantage of the password I'd observed him using. What I found was worse than anything I'd discovered in his computer files. There were hundreds of photos of Emma, many taken without her knowledge from across the street from her apartment, at restaurants, even inside the Innovate Labs office when she thought she was alone. He'd been documenting her life obsessively for months, creating a detailed visual record of her daily activities and personal moments. But the most damning evidence was in Tyler's text messages with himself. He'd been using a second phone to send himself reminders and strategic notes about his campaign to isolate Emma and eliminate his competition. The messages read like a serial killer's planning notes, coldly calculating and devoid of any genuine emotional connection to Emma as a person. One message thread from the week before the retreat laid out his plans in chilling detail. Retreat perfect opportunity to escalate physical intimacy. Isolated location reduces risk of interference. Plant camera to study her private behaviors and identify additional psychological vulnerabilities. If Marcus continues to be problematic, consider more direct methods of elimination. The phrase "more direct methods of elimination" made my blood run cold. I wasn't just dealing with a manipulative colleague or even a dangerous stalker. Tyler was escalating toward violence, and Emma was completely unaware that she was living with a predator who'd been studying her like a laboratory specimen. Armed with this evidence, I knew I had to act quickly, but I also knew I had to be strategic. Tyler had spent months building his reputation as the trustworthy, protective colleague, while painting me as unstable and inappropriate. If I simply showed people the evidence I'd gathered, Tyler could claim I'd fabricated it, or hacked his devices as part of my supposed obsession with Emma. I needed to expose him in a way that made denial impossible, and protected Emma from retaliation. The opportunity came during our final day team-building exercise. The entire company was gathered in the lodge's main conference room for a presentation about communication and trust in the workplace. Our CEO had hired an outside facilitator who specialized in corporate team dynamics, and the session was being recorded for training purposes. Tyler had volunteered to help set up the recording equipment, positioning himself as the helpful tech-savvy, a leader who always went above and beyond for the company. What Tyler didn't know was that I'd spent the morning preparing my own presentation. While he was busy setting up cameras and microphones for the official session, I was uploading carefully selected evidence to a secure cloud storage account and preparing a slideshow that would expose his true nature to the entire company simultaneously. The facilitator began the session by asking team members to share examples of trust and communication challenges they'd experienced in the workplace. Several people told generic stories about project miscommunications and personality conflicts. Tyler, playing his role perfectly, shared a thoughtful anecdote about the importance of protecting colleagues from uncomfortable situations and maintaining professional boundaries. When my turn came, I stood up calmly and walked to the front. of the room. The facilitator handed me the microphone with an encouraging smile, expecting another mundane workplace story. Instead, I looked directly at Tyler and said, "I'd like to talk about what happens when a colleague systematically stalks and manipulates another team member while destroying the reputation of anyone who might interfere with their obsession." The room went completely silent. Tyler's face went pale, but he maintained his composure, probably assuming I was about to make some vague accusation that he could easily deflect. Emma looked confused and slightly concerned, probably thinking I was about to embarrass myself again with another inappropriate outburst. I connected my laptop to the projection system that Tyler had so helpfully set up and began displaying the evidence I'd gathered. The first slide showed a timeline of Tyler's employment at Innovate Labs alongside his documented surveillance of Emma, demonstrating that his obsession had begun before he'd even officially started working with her. Timestamps on his photos proved he'd been following her, and photographing her from the moment he'd learned about the job opening. The gasps and murmurs from the audience grew louder as I displayed screenshots of Tyler's detailed notes about Emma's daily routines, her psychological vulnerabilities, and his strategies for isolating her from friends and colleagues. I could see people turning to stare at Tyler, who'd gone from pale to completely white and was gripping the edge of his chair so tightly his knuckles showed. Emma herself looked like she was going to be sick. As the evidence mounted, showing photo after photo taken without her consent, detailed documentation of her private conversations and personal habits, and Tyler's cold analysis of how to manipulate her emotions, she kept shaking her head as if trying to wake up from a nightmare. The presentation reached its climax when I displayed the video I'd taken of Tyler installing the camera outside Emma's cabin window. The footage was clear and undeniable, showing his face in detail as he carefully positioned the surveillance device and tested its angle. I explained how I'd discovered the camera and removed it before it could violate Emma's privacy further, and showed the device itself, which I'd brought to the presentation as physical evidence. But I wasn't finished. The final section of my presentation detailed Tyler's manipulation of my own reputation, showing the timeline of how he'd orchestrated my public humiliation at the grind. While positioning himself as Emma's protector, I displayed his notes about encouraging me to confess my feelings, his fake phone call, to create the perfect moment for my rejection, and his subsequent campaign to paint me as a dangerous obsessive while hiding his own far more serious stalking behavior. The room was dead silent except for the sound of Emma crying. She was staring at Tyler with a look of horror and betrayal that I'd never seen before, finally understanding that every moment of their friendship had been carefully calculated manipulation. Tyler, meanwhile, had abandoned any pretense of innocence and was looking around the room like a trapped animal searching for an escape route. Our CEO was the first to speak, his voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "Tyler Brooks, you're terminated immediately. Security will escort you from the premises, and you're banned from all company property. We'll be turning this evidence over to law enforcement and cooperating fully with any investigation." Tyler finally snapped, instead of accepting his fate. Quietly, he launched into a furious tirade that revealed the depth of his delusion and obsession. He screamed that I'd violated his privacy by hacking his devices, that Emma belonged with him because he understood her better than anyone else ever could, that all his surveillance and manipulation had been acts of love that ungrateful people couldn't appreciate. "You don't know her like I do," Tyler shouted, pointing wildly at Emma, who was being comforted by Lisa from HR. "I've spent months learning everything about her, studying what makes her happy, what she needs. Marcus just wanted to use her, but I was building a real relationship based on true understanding." The outburst was being captured by the company's recording equipment, creating a permanent record of Tyler's unhinged confession. He ranted about his detailed plans for their future together, his certainty that Emma would eventually understand, his devotion, and his rage at my interference with what he considered his legitimate courtship. Every word he spoke dug his grave deeper, providing additional evidence of his dangerous mental state and obsessive behavior. Security arrived within minutes, alerted by our CEO's emergency call. Tyler continued screaming threats and accusations. As they restrained him, promising to make me pay for ruining his relationship with Emma, and insisting that she'd realize her mistake once. I was out of the picture permanently. His words left no doubt about the violence he'd been contemplating, validating my decision to expose him publicly rather than try to handle the situation privately. As Tyler was dragged from the lodge, still shouting about his love for Emma and Get, his plans for revenge against me, the entire room sat in stunned silence. The facilitator, who'd probably never experienced anything like this in decades of corporate training, quietly suggested we postpone the rest of the session while people processed what had just happened. Emma approached me as everyone else filed. Out of the conference room, her eyes red from crying, but her voice steady. "Marcus, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. The way I treated you, the things I said about you not being worthy of love. I can't believe I fell for his manipulation so completely." For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than anger and frustration. Emma's apology was genuine, and I could see that she was finally understanding how thoroughly Tyler had poisoned her perception of me and everyone else around her. But more than vindication, I felt relief that the nightmare was finally over and that Emma was safe from further manipulation. The retreat ended early as law enforcement arrived to collect evidence and interview witnesses. Tyler's surveillance equipment was confiscated. His devices were seized. Formal charges were filed for stalking, harassment, and invasion of privacy.
Oh.
The story would eventually make local news as details of his elaborate manipulation campaign became public, but by then I was already focused on rebuilding my life and reputation. 6 months later, I was sitting in a conference room in downtown Seattle, closing the biggest deal of my career. The client, a major e-commerce platform, had just signed a contract for the mobile application framework I had developed independently. After leaving Innovate Labs, the technology that Tyler had tried to bury under endless maintenance tasks was now generating more revenue in a single quarter than I'd made in 3 years at my old job. My new company, Chen Digital Solutions, occupied a sleek office space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay. I'd hired Jake as my lead designer and brought on Nina as our cybersecurity specialist after she graduated early from her computer science program. The team was small, but brilliant, and for the first time in my professional life, I felt like my ideas were valued and my contributions mattered. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. The first few weeks, after Tyler's arrest, had been a whirlwind of police interviews, legal proceedings, and media attention that I'd never wanted. The story of the tech worker who'd exposed his colleague's elaborate stalking operation had made national news, turning me into an unexpected advocate for workplace safety and digital privacy rights. Emma had been instrumental in ensuring Tyler faced serious consequences for his actions. She'd cooperated fully with law enforcement, providing testimony about his manipulation tactics and the psychological impact of his behavior. The surveillance footage and documentation I'd gathered became the foundation of a criminal case that resulted in Tyler receiving a restraining order, felony stalking charges, and mandatory psychiatric evaluation. More importantly, Emma had taken the initiative to rebuild her relationships with the people Tyler had systematically isolated her from. She'd reached out to former friends to apologize for the distance that Tyler had created, reconnected with family members she'd been convinced were judgmental or unsupportive, and worked with a therapist to understand how she'd been manipulated so thoroughly without realizing it. Our own relationship had evolved into something unexpected and genuine. Without Tyler's poisonous influence, Emma and I discovered we actually enjoyed each other's company and shared similar values about honesty, respect, and professional integrity. There was no dramatic romantic reconciliation or sudden declaration of love, just a gradual friendship based on mutual understanding and shared experience. Emma had left Innovate Labs 3 months after the retreat, accepting a position with a marketing firm that specialized in ethical business practices and transparency. She'd become passionate about helping other women recognize the warning signs of manipulative behavior. Speaking at conferences about psychological safety in the workplace and consulting with companies on creating healthier environments, we still met for coffee occasionally, but now it was as equals who'd survived a traumatic experience together, rather than as a pursuer and the pursued. Emma had apologized extensively for her harsh words at the grind, explaining how Tyler had primed her to view my genuine feelings as threatening and inappropriate. She'd been horrified to learn that her cruel rejection had been based entirely on Tyler's manipulative coaching rather than her own authentic response. The legal case against Tyler had revealed the full scope of his disturbing behavior. Police had discovered that I wasn't his first victim. He'd engaged in similar campaigns of stalking and manipulation at his previous job in Seattle, which explained his mysterious departure from that position. 2 other women had come forward with similar stories of psychological manipulation and surveillance, leading to additional charges and a pattern that ensured Tyler would face serious prison time. Perhaps more satisfying than Tyler's legal consequences was watching his carefully constructed reputation crumble completely. The recording of his unhinged rant at the retreat had been shared widely within the tech industry, making him unemployable and exposing the dangerous personality he'd hidden behind his charming facade. His LinkedIn profile had been deleted. His professional references had distanced themselves from him, and his future prospects in any field requiring trust or interpersonal skills had been permanently destroyed. My own reputation had undergone a complete reversal. Colleagues who'd shunned me during the worst of Tyler's campaign now reached out to apologize and expressed admiration for my courage in exposing such a dangerous predator. Job offers poured in from companies that valued both my technical skills and my demonstrated integrity under pressure. Speaking engagements at cybersecurity conferences and workplace safety seminars had established me as an expert on digital stalking and corporate psychological manipulation. The most unexpected development had been my relationship with my family. My parents, who'd initially blamed me for creating workplace drama, had been forced to confront their own biases when the truth about Tyler's manipulation became public. They'd apologized sincerely for not supporting me during the crisis and had made genuine efforts to understand how their reaction had compounded my isolation and distress. Nina had been particularly proud of how I'd handled the situation, telling everyone who'd listen about her brother's brilliant detective work and strategic thinking. She'd used the experience as inspiration for her senior thesis on digital privacy and surveillance technology, eventually landing internships with major cybersecurity firms based on her insights into how predators use technology to stalk and manipulate victims. My new office building had a rooftop garden where I sometimes went to think during lunch breaks. Standing among the lavender and rosemary plants, looking out over the Seattle skyline, I often reflected on how dramatically my life had changed. The quiet, insecure developer who'd been afraid to speak up in meetings had been replaced by a confident entrepreneur who commanded respect from clients and colleagues alike. The experience with Tyler had taught me valuable lessons about trust, manipulation, and the importance of believing in my own perceptions, even when everyone else seemed to disagree. I'd learned to recognize red flags in interpersonal relationships, to value people who supported me during difficult times, and to walk away from situations where my worth wasn't recognized or respected. Most importantly, I'd discovered that Emma's cruel assessment of my worthiness had been completely wrong. The problem hadn't been that I was unworthy of love or respect. The problem had been that I'd been seeking validation from people who were either manipulated themselves or too self-interested to recognize genuine character and integrity. My phone buzzed with a text message from Emma, congratulating me on closing the Seattle deal and inviting me to a celebration dinner with her marketing team. 6 months ago, such an invitation would have sent me into hours of anxious preparation and romantic fantasizing. Now, I simply replied that I'd be happy to join them, looking forward to an evening of good conversation with people who appreciated me for who I actually was, rather than who they thought I should become. As I packed up my laptop and prepared to leave the office, I thought about Tyler, probably sitting in a prison cell somewhere, still convinced that his obsessive behavior had been motivated by love, rather than the desire to possess and control another human being. His downfall had been swift and complete, but more importantly, his removal from our lives had allowed Emma and me to become the people we were meant to be without his toxic influence. The elevator descended toward the lobby, carrying me toward a future that was entirely my own creation, built on authentic relationships and genuine accomplishments. Rather than desperate attempts to win approval from people who'd never truly valued me, For the first time in years, I was exactly where I belonged, surrounded by people who saw my worth clearly and never made me question whether I deserved their respect. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.